And I don't think we've actually ever talked about the subject, but the Dynamite Kid's book. I mean, I know you didn't like it, and what were your complaints with it?
It's funny what people find that I didn't like about it. What I didn't like about it was I didn't think it captured what he was really like, and I know it was him that wrote it, but to be really honest, he came across like such a jerk in his book, and in fact, he was actually a much better guy than that.
Because he did come across like that, which I thought was...
I think he was the same guy he was then, to be really honest, and it's kind of a shame. I remember the guy, right off the top, he was always a bully. Dynamite was always a bully, and he was always, not the easiest guy to get along with sometimes. But at the same time, he was a great guy, he was a great character, and he had all these great qualities, and he was a great, what they call, enforcer in the dressing room kind of thing. He weeded out the guys with the bad attitudes. Everybody loved him, and when I read his book, he raved about, and I don't have anything against anybody he raved about, but he put over more guys that he went out drinking with were great wrestlers rather than how they were judged for their work or how much they drew money, Dan Spivey was an okay guy, but he raves about Dan Spivey in the book like he's Ricky Steamboat or something. It's just not the same thing. I thought his own analogies of himself and I just thought it was a shame. He's obviously not the same guy that I remember from a few years ago, and he really missed. I just don't think he certainly didn't bring out his best qualities. And I think if I was going to write a book about him, I'd make you could actually like him.
Now, one thing about the book is that the book was probably, out of all the wrestling books, the most open when it comes to drug use of the wrestler, certainly in the 80s WWF.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other guys who've kind of said stuff, but I mean, he went into detail, and I don't know if he exaggerated his own use. I think he probably was pretty straight with it, and it was pretty shocking, I think, to people who weren't in the business who may have read it for the first time.
Yeah, like in looking back on reading it, I didn't find anything he said in there was like unrealistic. There was, whatever he was taking steroids, and I think he was pretty honest about all that stuff. And I think he had he didn't care who he offended by it. So, no, I think that was pretty accurate. The pills and all that stuff. I hate to say he was one of the forerunners of that, or he was very. I think a lot of his problems today resulted from him not knowing he was hurting himself as badly as he was, and that seems to be a prerequisite for so many other wrestlers in this business. Is they get hooked on the painkillers, and they take them to get in the ring, they take them to get out of the ring, they take them to work out, they take them to, they got to take this to sleep, they got to do, it's an awful shame that it happens, and it's been happening for a long time. But I can think of far too many wrestlers that I've met that were pretty clean cut when I first met them, and then you see them around that kind of environment for not even 9 months. A year later, you see them and they're because they're face down in their food, someone's helping them up to their room. It's awful. And I think British Bulldogs, both of them were guys that you take a pain pill and you squat, 1,000,000 pounds kind of thing, and they're suffering for it today, both of them.
One of the things about the book, especially towards the latter part of his career, that I found fascinating is, especially after he had the big injury, and even a little bit before then, you see a portrait of this guy who, obviously in his prime was one of the great workers, who is trying to, he's in pain, and he's, as the years go by, in more and more pain to where he could hardly walk, and he's taken the drugs to stay in the business, to stay as high in the business until the point where literally, he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't, the stories of him in the last year or two and how much pain he was in, you could tell, like, watching him, he wasn't the wrestler that he once was. But I don't think anyone realized just how much he was doing just to get in the ring, and how, really tragic the end of his career really was at such a young age.
Yeah, when I think of him, I think of Dynamite. I remember even when he worked for my father, his knees were shot you have to understand, Dynamite was clearly a kid that was on steroids from maybe the time he was about 17 years old, and heavily into them, or 18 maybe. And I think Davey quite conceivably the same thing, but they got really young into steroids. They had great physiques when they were young, which had a lot to do with how they drew money, and of course they were stronger, faster. they were really well-oiled machines when they were in their early 20s, both of them, and they made money, and they did really well. But I often think now that it's my own experience with steroids, the limited use in contrast to them or comparison to them. But I think steroids, especially at a young age, deteriorate your joints. They give you a false security in the sense that you feel that you're indestructible all the time, and then combining that with painkillers. The way Dynamite bounced around the ring and the way he worked and how hard he worked, and nobody worked harder than him. There's no doubt, like when I think of how many, he broke his hands, he broke his elbows, he broke his shoulders, his neck, his ears were cauliflowered, his knees were shot, his ankle, there's nothing left. There was nothing, including the 2 discs taken out of his back. Nobody gave more to this business than he did, and unfortunately, I think, including his 2 front teeth, he gave it all, and in the end, he became a very bitter, sour guy when he couldn't do it anymore. And it's just a shame that he kind of missed his calling. And I feel a lot of sympathy for him.